In the first reading, my friends, we have the arrival of the Gospel in the person of St. Paul in Rome itself. And we have this concluding verse. Paul spent the whole of the 2 years in his own rented lodging. He welcomed all who came to visit him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching the truth about the Lord Jesus Christ with complete freedom and without hindrance from anyone. So we have this first reading which speaks of the apostle of the Gentiles, and the Gospel speaks of Peter. The scene is taken as an indication of the way in which the Lord is protecting the vessel of Peter, which is the church, through the storms which threaten it and which we witness in our time, do we not? These then are the readings chosen for this day, on which we remember these two churches erected way back in the earliest stages, because it only became possible after the Constantinian peace. And the early churches, big ones, were coming up already at that time in the Holy Land, because he sent his mother, St. Helena, there, and then also in Rome. We have the beginnings of the Church of the Lateran at the same time, and fairly soon afterwards, because of a miracle, there comes the Church of St. Mary Majors. And so we have there already the 4 major basilicas going back to the early centuries in Rome. And we know from the excavations which were done under Pius XII during the war that the bones of St. Peter are there. And indeed, it would make sense that they would not build a church there in 330 in a place which was already untouchable, because it was a place of burial, that Vatican part of Rome, in pagan times, and therefore not to be touched or interfered with. If that were the case, it meant that there was a reason for it. Therefore, the reason was to be found, and they found it, just as, I believe, it was in the ear of St. Paul that it was revealed that the investigations made under Benedict XVI had conclusively indicated, yes, it was the head of St. Paul, there under the high altar of St. Paul, outside, because at the time it would have been outside the walls of Rome. In fact, you can see the walls, because I lived there, and that part, the Ostiense, goes out of the main centre of Rome and goes towards the sea eventually, Ostia, where St. Monica died, the Via Ostiense, and then you come into these walls of Rome. But I open a parenthesis which is not indifferent. In the Jubilee year, we closed virtually our monastery for a few days in midwinter to get the indulgence as a whole community, and off we went to Rome, and we did the thing on foot within Rome. And we were able to experience that actually the distance between St. Paul outside the walls and Trefontane, where through tradition we know that he was actually martyred, is walkable, and therefore it was quite possible that his head would have ended up there, and not there where it was lost, because that was a place of violence. It was a gladiatorial school, that area of Trefontane, and he, of course, being a Roman citizen, could not be crucified, as was Peter. He was beheaded, which is slightly more dignified, and according to that ancient tradition, and the name too gives it, 3 fountains, Trefontane, bounce, 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 and these 3 fountains came up. So, all that to say that this is living history and is our history. And when the Gospel came to Rome, it is not just a historical event, it is providence intervening, because it is on the divine, a fulfillment of that concentric promise and prophecy given by the Lord at the Ascension, that they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, in Samaria, and to the uttermost bounds of the world. And here at the end of the Acts, written by that same Testament, because we know that Luke wrote the Acts as well, and that's where we find this coming at the beginning of it, and the Lord is going to heaven. There it comes to fulfillment, Rome in this last part of the Acts. And from there, because of providential interference, if you like, making it possible that there would be the common language of Greek all over the Mediterranean basin, and language as a language of future culture in a great part of that western part of the world, would make it possible, in a capillary effect, to reach all the parts of the world, including eventually the Celtic fringe. By the way, Latin was the use of, if you look at the books, we've still got them in patrology. It's Latin they were using in the monasteries of Celtic Ireland, which is interesting. Therefore, there's a close link with Rome, even in Wales and Ireland. Now, what I was going to meditate on for a few seconds was the gospel. Here we have power. You notice that Peter did start to walk on the water, and then he caught on what was going on. This is impossible, and he started to get alarmed, and down he went. That has been taken as an indication of what the Lord is asking of us, complete trust and just to put out our hand. Now, he is in control. But there is more going on in this gospel that meets the eye. Where was the Lord? Why did he leave them to row away on their own? Now, this pattern of the Lord's day comes and comes again in the gospel. Either we find the disciples come and find him in prayer, because he goes early into a desert place to pray, or he is there all night. All night. And I have been speaking to quite a few people over these recent years and picking out that this is something the Lord is giving quite a few souls. The discovery of the night. People are being taught directly by the Lord that this is the providential moment, the night. Now, we must look at it in practice because it impinges on the day. If one goes to a place in the world where there is not artificial light or artificial noise, the night is what it is. It is exposure to the elements and to solitude. It is exposure to time, for one sees the stars, and the stars are light years away. Therefore we're looking at time, we're looking at years away. By the time the rays are getting to us, it's years later. We're looking at what our ancestors looked at when we were not even thought of, who have gone into the beyond, even before the time of Christ. We're listening to undistracted time and thought, and that is quite a different mode of being. Now, transpose that to a modern situation in the Western Hemisphere. Our night is not night. At the flick of a switch, we have day in the midst of night. Add to that the turning of another knob, and we have voices, as in midday, right into the heart of the night. We have television and now YouTube. We are in company, virtual company, right into the night. Just look for a second at the huge difference that is between the night the Lord had on the mountain in prayer all night and what we're getting. Add to that the experience of the centuries, Christian centuries, the monastic centuries in particular, of the pre-day period. That is, the hours before dawn, after a certain amount of sleep. That too is pure. That too is virginal. That too, for centuries and centuries, and still is the case in the strict monastic life, is sacred. It is God's part, the first fruits. And it has been maintained with a strict discipline of great silence and virginity of soul and body. Because if one is fasting, then there is also the effect of a greater tranquility. once one starts eating, the mind is taken up by digestion, because it is the case that the distraction is there also, that the mind is used in the process of digestion. Hence it is the old discipline of receiving the body of the Lord, fasting. There is a greater receptivity. But fasting is not just a physical thing, it's a spiritual and mental thing. But we try to get into mode way before we encounter the timers. What is happening massively now, even in the life of pious Christians, is that possibility of prolonged exposure to what would have been about half the 24-hour period, the night, is not there. It means in practice that we're always buzzing, that we're always switched on. And part of it is our own responsibility, because we are not aware of the damage that we are doing to ourselves. But there is also another problem, and it's this, and it's one thing I would like to attack specifically, because it affects us all. It's those areas that we actually ruin ourselves, often because we do too much, often because we do everything that crosses our mind. When actually, if one looks at the quality of life and takes the thing stepping back one step and looking in from the outside, one sees that there is a greater quality in the day in the case of fewer things done quite often, when in fact they did not need to be done. Many of the things we do, we think we have to do. It is not necessary, for instance, to have a conversation going on for half an hour, and it could go on for 10 minutes. And our day is full of that kind of mistake. Energy is going, time is going, and our life, let's say, is going, and we're not aware where it's going. We are not in control of our time, we are being controlled. Now, we have to be responsible in the use of this precious gift of time, and especially, I would say, of the night, because that is God's part. It's important that we reflect before we put on some instrument which is going to deprive us of our light. I have noticed in the life of prayer in the oratory of my hermitage that with dimmed lights and candle lights before the Blessed Sacrament exposed in the hours of night, it is grossly more favourable to interiority and encounter than a loud light, and actually later on in the day as well, when more is in the mind. There is an immediacy in the stillness of dim light and total silence, which is very intense. It's there for the taking. We can do the equivalent wherever we are if we wish. If voluntarily we block out all that possibility of intimacy with the silent one through just putting on the television, then we are responsible for coming down a notch in the spiritual life. We have chosen the electricity, the virtual, the world, to the Sacred Heart and intimacy with Him, for we cannot compete. It's our choice which we prefer. And it's not just the television, because many pious souls are actually so computerized that they can't stop buzzing. And it's not favourable to the interior life. On Saturday, we went down to Roscrea because Father Peter, who had been my novice master, has cancer, and I wanted to see what the situation was there, to see whether actually he was on the way out or not, because he'd been very good. But I was reliving memories as I was there in the Abbey Church again. There is the stillness of the night in that big Abbey Church, where precisely there are very few lights once the sun goes down, and one can see the sanctuary lamp burning in the far end of the sanctuary, and there is the unchanged peace of the night, with incense lingering in the air. And one is aware of time passing, and one relives all those Cistercian nights, because the Cistercian night is very profound. It starts very early and is uncluttered. And remembering the end of the life of different monks that we buried, it makes us think of the relative nature of things, what matters and what matters less. And one particular person came to my mind. It was somebody I was sent to work with, Father Callis, who was very holy. He was an expert in Irish, actually. I think he entered not straight from school, but maybe in his 20s, perhaps say his 28. But he was very observant, never spoke, very faithful to the Trappist silence, and he was extremely severe with penance. And when we buried him, it made me realise what the important issues are in the use of time and life and what are not. Outside the monastic circle, he would not have made a great noise. But as one of my brethren in the community in the novitiate actually said, history is written in heaven. That is not the noise that we make on the history books here, but what is written on the book of life. And glory is not of what people say of us. Hence it is that it matters very little what is said at our funeral. It doesn't touch the soul one iota. What does is how much help we get from the prayers of those left behind. But then, as we buried him, we left him on, we let him go to the glory that he had conquered with pain and with fidelity. And then it came to us to write his obituaries, because they write to the other monasteries to say that someone has died, and they sent off a page summing up his life. And then again, one realizes, what will there be at the end of one's existence? What will one have done? And in the month of November, I would leave that with you. We're offering this for the Holy Souls, but think, we don't know when it will be our turn. Life is so fragile that we can die on the very day that we get up and not be prepared. People who go into the beyond without having a chance to say goodbye, and it happens quite a lot. But it's kind of important, because if the one chance that we've got has been sacrificed to intimacy with a machine, then we've messed up the one chance that we had. If on the other hand, we've tried, in the measure which is possible, to do calmly and well and in an unhurried manner, one day, one action at a time, all that was asked of us and not more, but with intimacy with the Lord, then there is a linear movement going calmly into the beyond and in an orderly manner. So let's think about these things on this night, my friends, because it's important stuff. We make too many mistakes by doing too many things never asked of us.